This Ryzen 9 9950X that I'm holding in my hands, unfortunately, is no longer with us, pals. It is a goner. It doesn't boot anymore. I've tried every single RAM stick individually whilst trying to boot this CPU, and it just will not boot on different motherboards. And in fact, I changed the CPU over to a Ryzen 9 7950X, and then the board miraculously booted up fine. Now, the motherboard is an ASRock Steel Legend X870 board. And in fact, looking at the ASRock subreddit, it's very concerning. There is a lot of people every day. It seems like there's a new person posting up a dead CPU in an ASRock board, and it looks like it is mainly to do with Ryzen 9000 series CPUs and not Ryzen 7000 series CPUs. In fact, I found one post from a particular user who reported that they had a Ryzen 7 9800X3D Go. They got that replaced, and then the next Ryzen 7 9800X3D was also gone as well. And then they replaced it with a Ryzen 7 7800X3D, and that seems to be working fine at this point in time on that motherboard. So what I'm testing in my situation personally is that I had my main system, and that was a good friend of mine just said, look, I need a PC for a few months. Do you have anything? I said, well, just use this one for the time being. And I'm not using it at this point in time. And so he started using it. And what I found was incredible in that the CPU, the 9950X, it was just gone. I've never seen anything like this whilst I've been in enthusiast tech. And this is over the course of like 20 plus years. So this issue is a real big one for me personally. One where I'm going to be looking at all the theories in today's video, because I'm going to be getting you guys an answer in the next few months, and it's most likely going to come from just good old trusty trial and error. Now, in terms of tuning, all we really did for him was lock in the Expo profiles. We were using some 6000 CL30 memory for this setup, and that was in a 64GB kit. Though in today's video, I'm going to go through 4 different theories that I have of what could be destroying these CPUs, and also we're going to talk about what Paul was doing when the system perished right after today's video sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Deepcool and their CH260, which is the successor to the CH160, yet that was ITX, and this is micro ATX with the ability to support GPUs all the way up to 413mm long, as well as having the option for an SFX power supply or an ATX power supply. Now, when it comes to cooling, here is where Deepcool get things right with the steel mesh front, top, and back, as well as having glass on the side to showcase the build. This is a combination of aesthetics and performance. And the best thing is you can mount anywhere from a 120 to even a 360mm water cooler at the top of this case. If you want to find out more, links in the description below. Let's get back to the video. Welcome back to Tech Yes City. Now, my friend Paul, he was using this system, and he was actually just watching movies when suddenly the whole system just gave out a no display signal on his monitor, which means that the whole system was actually still working fine. The fans actually didn't really change suddenly the speeds at which they were pushing air through the case. And what this meant was that the CPU had just died, doing relatively something that wasn't stressful. I mean, watching movies isn't really stressful on the CPU, nor is it that stressful on the GPU, which is something I'm going to talk about in one of the theories here today. But the first thing, and we're going to go into theory number 1 here, of what is destroying the CPUs is obviously the ASRock motherboards. And look at the subreddit here. There is so many of these posts that are being posted up, and people are just having these ASRock motherboards killing these Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. And it just seems like it's such a strong correlation here where you just cannot ignore the data anymore going forward. And so you need to get a precise answer. What is going on here? But I will say it seems to be like it's more Ryzen 9000 series CPUs on these ASRock boards, whether it's a B600 or an X870 series motherboard, seems to be happening across a heap of different ASRock boards here. And so what exactly is going on with these motherboards, where the point where they're just, the CPU's dying, and then the motherboard still works absolutely fine? And in fact, taking out the CPU and looking at the CPU closely, I could see the only thing that I noticed wrong with this CPU was towards the middle of the CPU itself, there was like some little grade marks on this particular 9950X. And I was able to clean those marks off easily and actually clean down the whole CPU and then try to get it to boot after that. And it just wouldn't boot either on both the system that it came out of or the test rig that I use for benchmarking, which is really weird because I've been using, say, my benchmark rig and all these other rigs for quite a while now with zero problems. So it just seems like this problem is something to do with perhaps an idle voltage is going way too high and it's still pumping power to a particular part of the CPU. Though what exactly is happening here? Well, we're seeing that this is happening on relatively non-stressful tasks. Now, generally when it comes to PC hardware, the only way you're destroying something is via heat or overvolting and too much power going through the CPU. And so what I think is happening here, at least with this 9950X, is while it's watching movies, there's a particular part in the CPU that, and I would probably hazard a guess that it's happening with the SoC voltage. That seems to be a common thing where the SoC voltage is perhaps spiking even momentarily. And then that's causing the CPU to just then say, hey, I'm checking myself out and no longer working anymore. So when we look at this motherboard a bit closer, the X870 Steel Legend Wi-Fi, it doesn't look like there's any damage on the pins whatsoever. And in fact, putting another CPU in the motherboard, you'd think that nothing ever happened. But when we look at the CPU a bit closer, I can see that either on the top or the bottom, depending on which way you're looking at the CPU, in the middle of the CPU, looks like the third pin down, there's a grayed out area here. Now, cross-checking that with a chart of what these pins actually do for the CPU, it would appear that this is the VSS or voltage source supply. And so when I actually check a lot of other people's areas where the CPU has been damaged, it's around these VSS pins or voltage source supply. So there's definitely something going on here basically with the voltage. And so the first theory here is that the motherboard is causing some sort of an overvolt, and that's causing the CPUs to fail and not come back to life at all. And then we can go on to the second theory here, and that is the CPUs. There's just a fault in some of these CPUs, and perhaps ASRock is overvolting a little bit higher than the other motherboard manufacturers, and this is causing a weak point and these Ryzen 9000 series CPUs to die. Now, I think with this second theory here, the weirdest thing is that ASRock or AMD, they haven't really come forward yet and talked about what exactly is happening here. Though in the meantime, AMD and ASRock, while they tread the lines, there's a lot of people having these issues. Now, the saddest thing with this whole situation is that me personally, I've been working very closely with ASRock over the last decade, and I'm just surprised to see this issue is just sort of kept under the radar, and it's sort of like they're hoping it'll go away. But as we've seen with the Intel 13th and 14th gen issue, it doesn't go away. It only gets worse the longer you don't talk about it. So as someone that's worked closely with ASRock, I'm like definitely going to be pressing them and saying, hey, I want to get to the bottom of this for my viewers, as well as making a recommendation, whether it's be, okay, the CPU's at fault or the motherboard's at fault. Now, if the motherboard's at fault, it's a simple recommendation. Don't buy an ASRock motherboard, right? Because you've got this risk now that is no longer there with the other motherboard manufacturers. And in fact, looking at all the data, it would seem that this is the case right now, where a lot of the other motherboard manufacturers aren't having these catastrophic fails happen on the CPU, where if there's some other issue, like say for instance, a RAM stick doesn't work or something, or you need to reseat the memory, that's not as bad as having a CPU that just no longer works. And if you change the motherboard around, the CPU is just gone now. So there's been permanent damage sustained to the CPU. Now, again, what is happening here? Could it be the motherboard or is it the CPU to blame? What exactly is going on here with these two factors? I'm not entirely sure, but here is where with theory 2, I'm definitely going to get to the bottom of it, where I'm going to replace this 9950X, and in the meantime, check if the 7950X fails within the next month. But then after that, I'm going to put in another Ryzen 9 9950X, and it so happens to just kill another 9950X, well, then we know it's the motherboard that is killing these CPUs here. Now, if there's another Ryzen 9 9950X that gets replaced after the 7950X, and then that kills that CPU, then we know it's the ASRock boards and the 9000 series in particular where it's killing the CPUs. And so it just seems like this is a really bizarre issue right now, to the point where I don't think it is as rare, at least as I once thought it was a few months ago, to to the point where this happened in one of my systems after a few months. And basically with CPUs, they're designed usually to last 10 years or more, especially if you've got the right conditions, where you've got, in this case, we had a really good case with a push-pull configuration. The airflow in this case is absolutely amazing. I don't think the temperatures are anything to worry about because the CPU cooler also works extremely well. It's a 360 mil water cooler. It's blowing air out the top of the case. So theory 1 and 2, I put them first because they are the strongest possibilities on why these Ryzen 9000 series CPUs are dropping off like flies. But now it's time to go into theory number 3 here, where I personally think this could be a contributing factor. And it's something that I did notice when I was testing out the RTX 5090 in particular, where that was just blowing hot air onto the memory chips, the DDR5 memory chips there, and actually making a noticeable, even on the surface temperatures here, a noticeable temperature increase on those memory sticks. And so here's where we've got some G.Skill 6000 megahertz memory. And I just decided to play one game of Fortnite with a sort of little bit of cardboard blocking off the airflow from hitting that memory. And then after that, just remove that piece of cardboard. So then that RTX 5090 could then just blow hot air on the memory. And what I found here was a good solid 10 degrees difference on the actual memory itself. And so that's actually quite a sizable difference, coupled in the fact that once you get to a certain point with temperatures, they actually start to work against themselves a lot faster and a lot harder. And that could be causing an issue trailing back to the CPU. It's just a theory that I got right now that could be killing some of these CPUs, especially when I kind of look at, say, for instance, the Hellhound RX 9070 XT and where they've placed that flow through design there. It's sort of just completely missing the memory. But if we look at, say, cards like the RTX 5080 or 5090, especially the Founders Edition cards, they're just blowing hot air straight on to that memory and everything around there. And so that air can be pretty hot air. You don't want that on high-end components, especially. You want that air going away from those sort of components, especially components like the DDR5 memory that does not have any direct cooling on it whatsoever. And so the weirdest thing here is we had an RTX 5070 Ti in this system, and that was blowing hot air on the memory. However, whilst you're watching movies, there really isn't a whole lot of GPU activity going on here. Now, what my friend said was that he was watching movies for actually a couple of hours at that point. So the whole system really wasn't under any stress when this CPU dropped off, which is why I kind of put this theory a little bit behind the other two here, because yeah, watching movies really isn't strenuous on the CPU nor the GPU. The last theory that we got here is, of course, one that I know in this particular instance did not happen, but I'm going to mention it in today's video. And that, of course, is user error. People are installing these CPUs in a sort of misaligned position, or they're not fully inserted into the socket. And then that's causing some kind of arcing issue where the CPUs are then melting. And you've seen some of these photos where these CPUs have just been completely destroyed. And in this case, I know it wasn't the issue at all. And whenever I install a CPU, yeah, it's the first thing I do is make sure that that CPU has been inserted 100%. So I know that user error here is not to blame. For a lot of these people, I'm guessing on the forums as well, that are having these issues, the way they chat, the way they talk, it's not their first rodeo either when it comes to building a PC. So user error, I'm putting this right at the end here because I know it didn't happen at all in this instance when I was having this system built, especially because it was already working for a few weeks beforehand. So if you had a misaligned CPU or a faulty install on the CPU, issues would have come out before a few weeks of usage. So in terms of user error, of course, like anything, it's always a thing, but I don't think it relates to this issue directly, where these CPUs are just suddenly dropping out. So there are the 4 theories right there that I presented. I think it's looking like, however, the data is pointing towards ASRock Motherboards doing something with Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. And one thing is, I'm going to get to the bottom of it personally, whether AMD and ASRock stay quiet about the issue and whatnot. And I'm also going to Computex very soon, where I'm going to be definitely talking to ASRock and getting more answers for you guys on this whole issue, because I'd say it's one of the most serious issues to break in the tech space in the last decade, especially after the 13th and 14th gen debacle. But CPU stability, I mean, I come from a day and age getting into enthusiast tech where CPUs never failed. The only time they failed was when people were deliberately themselves overclocking the CPUs and they were pushing the limits too hard. And that was their own bad. I never, back in the day, you never heard of someone having a CPU that was just running normally and then suddenly it dropped out while they were either gaming or watching movies or whatnot. This seems to be a common trend now with, like, look at 13th and 14th gen, the issues they had there. And then we go to AMD now with the Ryzen 9000 series. These CPUs are dropping out. What is going on here, guys? Like, AMD and ASRock, you guys have a duty of care to make sure that when people buy, especially a Ryzen 9 CPU, that they're getting the best experience possible and it's not dropping out on them after a few weeks of usage. I mean, this is the thing about a Ryzen 9, right? A lot of people are buying these CPUs for some serious productivity or a workstation, and to have a CPU just drop out. It's not the fact that it's an expensive CPU. It's more the fact that a lot of these people, especially if it's in a workstation, they're going to waste all this time trying to figure out, firstly, what happened to the PC. Then secondly, they got to figure out, okay, how do I get this thing replaced? And should I just buy another one in the meantime? And then even then, the third thing is they're going to have anxiety now, knowing that if they're doing some work, is their whole system just going to switch off while they're doing some work? So it's a really serious problem where I'd like to see some answers here and what is being done about it ultimately, because it's one of the most craziest things I've seen in tech, being in tech so far. It's not like there was any warning signs or anything like that either. It was just suddenly you're watching movies and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, it's a goner. Kind of reminds me of just back in the day when John Cena always used to take those RKOs, except this time it's like, is the ASRock Motherboard and Randy Orton, or is the CPU Randy Orton? The last thing I will say is that I've been, out of all the motherboard manufacturers, I've been using ASRock boards here in my studio, both in my personal systems and in a lot of gaming PCs that I flip. And this is the first time I've seen anything like this. So, I mean, if it proves to be, which I hope it isn't, if it proves to be that ASRock is to solely blame here for these issues, then I'll definitely have to stop working with them. That's the sad thing, because it's just such a serious issue where if you know something's wrong, you tell people about it straight away and you do the right thing. Instead, if you sort of do this, if you do this way of business where you're like, we'll just pretend nothing's wrong and keep it all on hush hush, it can really damage a brand's reputation. And so I really hope it's not that, but I guess we're going to find out soon enough. But in the meantime, it just looks like, I mean, the statistics are there and they're pointing towards that this is happening on ASRock boards. So in the meantime, I guess you might want to hold off, especially if you got a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9. But even then, I'm looking on the forums, it's happening on Ryzen 5s too. If you got a 9000 series CPU, you may want to hold off on getting an ASRock board, where it looks like it's mainly happening with the 9000 series CPUs. With all that aside, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. And also, if you have any questions or comments or any of your own experiences, be sure to drop them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And with that all out of the way, I'll catch you in the next tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.